we begin. It's 2 p.m. sharp. So good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from today. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give them a few minutes just to ensure that they're all settled in. So thank you all for joining today's session. It is the 4th edition of our Concrete Ideas webinar series with the theme PPPs in Urban Regeneration, Global Best Practices, Nigerian Opportunities. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share a link with you after the event. We welcome you to visit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions. Please use the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and the moderator will either pose it to our speakers during the Q&A session or hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the event. I hereby hand over to the Chief Host and Chairman, Lafarge Africa PLC, Prince Adebode Adefioye, to give his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginuka, and good afternoon to everybody. The Honorable Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, the CEO, Lafarge Africa PLC, Khalid El Dukani, our distinguished thought leaders here present, Mr. Mohamed Yahya, Resident Representative, United Nations Development Programme, Mrs. Mary Ojulari, President, European Business Chamber, Nigeria, Mr. Emma Okazwike, the President, Nigerian Institute of Estate Surveyors and Valuers, Ms. Tosin Oshinowo, President, Principal Architect, CM Design Atelier, Mr. Simon Kusa, Curator, Project Manager, Future Benue Development Plan, Dr. Basirat Oyalowo, Research Manager, Center for Housing Studies, University of Lagos, Nigeria, and Mr. Femi Yusuf, Head Mortal Innovation and Products Development, Lafarge Africa PLC. My colleagues, directors of Lafarge Africa that have joined online, management and staff, Lafarge Africa PLC, valued stakeholders and partners from the private and public sector, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am indeed excited to welcome you all to the 4th edition of our series of thought leadership webinar series, Concrete Ideas, a leading platform for the exchange and generation of ideas on critical issues in the housing, infrastructure, and construction sectors. I sincerely thank our special guest of honor, the Honorable Minister of Works and Housing, for graciously and gracefully accepting to participate in the 4th edition of the Concrete Ideas. I also thank our thought leaders who have agreed to share insights from decades of hard work and dedication to their crafts. We also appreciate every participant who have joined us today as we discuss such an important national issue. Great policies have roots in focused, high-quality, well-informed, and inclusive discussions between stakeholders, the citizens, and government of an economy. Urban degeneration is a global challenge that can be solved through urban regeneration projects, resulting in the advancement of socio-economic and technological development of economics, including the creation of more efficient transportation system, sustainable livelihoods, employment generation, foreign investment, healthier citizenship, amongst many other gains. Today, you will find that the Nigerian technology companies continue to attract millions of dollars in investments. The country can definitely do much better if we organize or reorganize and regenerate our cities to nurture vibrant hubs for the creative and current digital economy. We believe that through robust discussions and effective collaboration at all levels, we can transform our urban centers into vibrant communities that attract investment, job creations, boost productivity, and power economic growth. I look forward to another very enlightening discussion as our panel of experts engage with today's theme, Public-Private Partnership in Urban Regeneration, Global Best Practices, Nigerian Opportunities. I now invite our special guest of honor, the Honorable Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, to give his keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prince Adefuye. And let me say how very enabling your opening and welcome remarks have become for me. The protocols have already been very admirably set out by you, so I will not go there again except to say, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I feel particularly welcome, and I'm sure other participants also do. And my first statement is to commend the Lafarge Group for this initiative. I'm beginning to feel like a member of the Lafarge family now, seeing every one of you so frequently, and for a good reason too, because if you like the cliche, ideas rule the world, and every opportunity to interact, to learn from others, and to perhaps pass on the little that I know is something that I am always enthused about. And so I thank you for this opportunity, and I do not take the privileges that you afford me to speak at these events lightly. And they enable me also represent and perhaps present the views of the government that employs me, so that we can have a more interactive relationship and feedback from the people on whose behalf we exercise powers. And the topic itself about urban regeneration and the possibilities around PPPs and the opportunities is quite interesting. So I'm going to slide, I have a slide and I'm just going to flip through a few things there. But let me say first of all that as far as urban regeneration goes, the first thing that perhaps comes to the mind is slums when you hear urban regeneration. That's perhaps what first leaps at you mentally. But and these are slums or blighted areas in the sense that they were unplanned. They are a response to rapid urbanization. They are a response to the need for shelter and basic survival by people living on the margin. So that is one side of the coin to which I will speak. But the other side of the coin, and I will close with that side of the coin, are well-planned cities that are now falling into some disuse and that need a facelift, a boost, an injection of capital to enable them respond to these needs. So starting from the unplanned settlements, if you move that slide on to the third slide for me, you will just see the, you've gone past it now, whoever is doing that. The third slide, thank you very much, just stay there. You just see the point I want to make here is about those urban renewal and slum upgrading works undertaken in the Ministry of Works and Housing. So we do some, and I will speak to them. But the thing to emphasize is that whatever interventions we undertake, they're a result of technical diagnostic studies. We go to those communities, do a wholesale evaluation of what their realities and their challenges are, and then we sort of try to help build it from the basic. But there is only so much that we can do, and we will require the support and the input of not only the state governments, but also the local governments, the communities where these urban agglomerations that we talk about are actually situated. The government so close to them has much more to do than perhaps we from the helicopter view at the federal government level. So I will just go on to slide 5 quickly, just to highlight and what is currently going on. So at the federal government level, a total of 67 different projects have been executed, costing us about 3.64 billion naira. And these projects comprise of 40 roads, drainages, culverts, boreholes, and street lighting projects. And as we are bound to do, we are bound to ensure some equity in the distribution. So what you will see in slide 6, if you go there, is a high-level summary, high-level summary of what those projects look like in some graphic rendition. So you're looking at about 21 kilometers of paved roads within settlements in aggregate. And you're looking at about 7.8 kilometers of street lighting powered by solar panels. What you will see on slides 7, 8, and so on, if you move on quickly, are just photographic impacts. So just stay back there. Just stay back there to the slide 7, if you will. Slide 7, if you will. Thank you. So I will run it along very quickly. So this is intervention in terms of road work and also solar street lights in Uyo, in Akwa Ibom. It's a community needy of this service. And the point I want to make very quickly about this kind of street lighting, we undertook a similar project in one community in Nasarawa, and within 2 years, it transformed the education. This is not the standard, but its impact is important to discuss. That students could study at night under this lighting. I would love for the lighting to be indoors, but just to dimension its transformative impact, school grades increased and the community came back to us. And that led us then to start supplying them with solar home systems. This happened in my other life when I was in, I used to worship in the power ministry. But it's just to dimension what these kind of things can do. So if you move on the other slide to 8, and I will soon be done. If you move to slide 8, this is just an example of the impact of just water as an intervention in those communities. As centralized as it is, I would love to see the water in taps turning inside their homes. But this is the difference between a 4-kilometer journey to a river for some people. This is the difference, just to get water. And so when the president talks about lifting people out of poverty, it's not just putting cash in their hands. This is the difference between time, access, and quality of life. And this is healthcare, because sanitation really is the backbone of healthcare, rather than hospitals as people want to think, rather than drugs as people want to think. Sanitation is really the biggest bequest of modern medicine to our civilization. And sanitation is impacted significantly by access to water supply. So if you move that on very quickly, I think to slide, let's move it on to slide, I think it is slide 12, and I will be done. I will stop at 12. If you just go to 12. So now this is defining, and this is just an example of road network, and this just defines mobility. And you can, the difference is stark. And you can see what can be done efficiently in the after slide, and what can be done with a lot of pain, inconvenience, and so on with the slide to the left. And so I will close on this part of the urban regeneration by saying that as we embark on regeneration of these blighted, unplanned areas, two things must stand at the back of our mind, and they're tough questions to resolve. One is that which child that grows up in this area wants to raise his own family there, in spite of the intervention and after the intervention? Which child that grows up here, in spite of the water we have brought, the road pavement we have brought, and the street lighting that we have brought, wants to say, I want my next generation to be produced here? Oftentimes what you see is they want to leave these places. And which takes us to the next, which takes us perhaps to the next very, very difficult question, which is, where do we draw the thin line between regeneration and gentrification? Very thin line, but it's there, and it has happened in other jurisdictions. And I hope that the panelists and the discussants will perhaps shed light on this, because really, if you did a poll, you will see that not enough want to come back here. And in closing, let me go to the other side of regeneration, the planned settlements that have now become a shadow of themselves. And let me just speak very quickly to places like Yaba in Lagos, for those who lived in Lagos or who are familiar with it. Yaba, Apapa, Surulere, GRA, Ikeja. And you will see that in the last decade and a half or so, if you took a sample of those who now live in Victoria Island and in Ikoyi, they all grew up in Yaba, Surulere, and that axis. But as the quality of infrastructure degraded, they moved on to Ikoyi, and Ikoyi itself is now, if it has not become, overcrowded. And Ikoyi's infrastructure is also aging. You will see, therefore, that over the last decade and a half, the government of Lagos State has been intervening in the infrastructure of Yaba, Surulere, Apapa, and more recently, Ikoyi and Victoria Island, to uplift the quality of support that will deal with the people. So that's the other side, in my view, of regeneration, the aging infrastructure, and the opportunities that lie there are enormous. If you look at Adetokunbo Ademola today, I can tell you that road was built as a partnership between the Lagos State government and the Eco Hotel Group. And I just say Adeogun was entirely reconstructed by the Zenith Bank Group in exchange for advertising rights. And in the next few weeks, if that hasn't happened already, is a major destination today for family, for the Christmas lighting and the Christmas festivity. So these are ideas that I think that we can replicate as we go along, and I'm willing to listen and learn more from those who write the checks about the possible ways in which we can structure partnerships to mobilize capital to regenerate our planned and unplanned communities that need a hand up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Go ahead, Ginika.
So thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We'll hand over to the CEO right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ginika, and good afternoon. Your Honorable Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, SAN. Before I get into the rest of the protocol, I cannot miss the opportunity to thank you so much for your presence, for your support, for your engagement, and all the insights that you've been granting to us since the beginning of the concrete ideas. So a very, very warm welcome and very, very sincere appreciation to your presence with us. Mr. Chairman, Lafarge Africa PLC, Prince Adibodi Adifie, always your presence is very, very much valuable for us. For the sake of the time and to give the floor for the panelists to really engage, I respect all standing protocols for all our panelists. Very much welcome to our session today. Management and staff of Lafarge Africa, valuable stakeholders and partners, gentlemen of the press, and the distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, today's theme, PPP in Urban Regeneration, Global Best Practices, Nigerian Opportunities, follows the suggestion of the Honorable Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, to explore in greater detail the theme of the last edition, New Solutions for Nigerian Urban Housing. More than 80% of the global GDP is generated in cities. Making our cities more livable and more productive is thus one of the best strategies for growing our economies and improving welfare of millions of our people. Great cities in the world today were once marred by slums and urban regeneration projects that have helped global cities attain their status. In line with our commitment to sustainability and our resolve to build progress for people and the planet, Lafarge is keen on collaborating with stakeholders in finding durable strategies to unlock the massive gains in creating livable and connected cities. We have so much to gain in terms of reducing poverty, improving the health of our citizens, tackling climate changes. Urban regeneration, when executed successfully, calls for an integrated approach through which we engage architects, economics, finance professionals, lawyers, and many other stakeholders that needs to contribute to the one objective. We have assembled a panel of esteemed stakeholders that will stimulate rich discussions and generate recommendations and solutions that will be beneficial to the nation. Once again, I thank you all, thought leaders and participants, as well as everyone that helped in the way to make these sessions and events happening. I look forward to the rich deliberation and discussions that we will resume shortly. With this, I thank you so much again. I hand over to our moderator, Arit Okubu, to start the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Khalid, and good afternoon, everyone. All protocols duly observed. It's a pleasure to be back here, especially because I moderated the last session where we talked about new solutions to urban housing. And the thought of urban regeneration was one that started there. And the Honorable Minister had actually encouraged us to explore the conversation. So it's a double pleasure to be here, also because I'm looking forward again to such rich and enlightening and insightful points like we had the last time. Now, the United Nations Human Settlements Program estimates that about 80 million Nigerians live in slums. And when we say slums, we include squatter housing, unauthorized land developments, rooms and flats in dilapidated and uncompleted buildings. They may also be authorized settlements where buildings and facilities have become dilapidated or grossly inadequate. Now, SDG 11 talks about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So this is how we start to frame this conversation. Slums are a personal, social, and economic burden. And the Honorable Minister made a point about how even with interventions, many people for them would not want to grow up their families in the same communities where they have grown up. And that also leads to that conversation about intergenerational poverty, intergenerational effects of certain urban spaces. However, slums are not just a problem, they're also a huge economic possibility. Why? Because not every slum is built based on poverty. Some slums are also created because of poorly designed or inefficiently regulated urban land and housing markets, inadequate infrastructure, and a lack of housing finance. And this means that they're amenable to policy changes. It's a very fascinating foundation on which to build our conversation today. And I'm very excited by the panelists that we have because we're going to hear, I think, some very rich perspectives. And so it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Mohamed Yaya, Resident Representative, United Nations Development Program. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. It's also my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ima Wike, the President, Nigeria Institute for Estate Surveyors and Valuers. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Tosin Oshinowo, Principal Architect, CM Design Atelier. Welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. I'm also pleased to welcome Mr. Simon Usa, Curator and Project Manager, Future Benue Development Plan. Welcome, sir.
Hi, Arid. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
It's nice to see you representing Benue as well. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Basirat Oyalowo, Research Manager, Center for Housing Studies, University of Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome, Dr. Oyalowo.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
And it is my pleasure to welcome, joining and rounding out this panel, Mr. Femi Yusuf, Head Mortar Innovation and New Product Development, Lafarge Africa PLC. Welcome, Mr. Yusuf.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm looking forward to getting into our conversations, and I'm going to ask two things to keep in mind as we go. There are about 6 of us here, and I would like us to maximize our time. So I'm going to ask that we keep our answers to about 2-3 minutes per round, as much as possible. And then this conversation is about finding solutions. It's about finding actionable ideas. And so as we deliberate, I would like us to approach our conversations from a solutions-oriented perspective. We've been very fortunate to have many of our outcomes and concrete ideas taken into policy development. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we can come up with at the end of this session. And now, to begin our questions, I'd like to start with you, Mr. Wike. A key problem of urban regeneration is valuation, determining who holds a stake in informal settlements before they are transformed to high-value neighborhoods, and how much that stake is worth. How can we integrate this conversation when we talk about regenerating urban communities?
Thank you very much. Let me start with the definition that the Honorable Minister gave to us. First of all, we have to identify 2 stages here. We have one that is not planned at all, and the one that is planned and are now getting into slum area that we want to now carry out urban regeneration. Now, the stakeholders are people that are residing in that area. They are the stakeholders because they are the people that are actually residing within the area that are no longer livable. Now, it is now the duty of the government to see how those infrastructure that are lacking in that area will be extended to the people that are actually residing in that neighborhood. So invariably, you talk about the residential, those that are living, those that are working, and those that are playing in that area. There are people who live in an area that are slum. They move from that area to another place to work. There are those who live in another area, but they also have a business in the slum area that they are working for. These are stakeholders. So now, going to the second question because of the time limit, is that we need to have the need assessment of these people that are living in this area. What are the infrastructure that are lacking in that area? What are the amenities that they actually need that will make people live, work, and play in that area? Now, once that is identified, the third leg of the question you're asking is that how would these people move? It might not be possible for you to move the people at the same time. That is like trying to do resettlements. And you are developing another area before you come back to this the slum area. No, what they can do is that there should be a kind of partnership arrangement where those infrastructures that have been identified, those facilities that the people need to make them stay, work, and play in that area are being provided in phases. Now, you take part of the slum area, you redevelop those areas. And once those areas are developed, people are willing to come back to stay in that area. Now, but if you do resettlement, which means you are moving the people, just like the Honorable Minister have said, most of the people will not want to come back. And that also will create another problem of housing. So the best thing for us to do is to identify what are the amenities, what are the facilities that are lacking within this neighborhood. that when those amenities are brought into the place, the people will live, stay, and play. On us as estate surveyors and valuers, where land is all about factors of production and it has value. Now, because it has value, the location of those particular properties have influence on the value of the properties. Because if you have a place where there are no infrastructure, what it means is that the land value in that area will be low. But where you have infrastructure, the land value will be high. So when you have a slum, whatever neighborhood that is within that slum, the land value will definitely be low. But when you have the infrastructure, people are willing to, there will be higher demand for people to go in and stay. The economic factor there is that the higher the demand, the higher the price. So once there is more demand for people to stay in that area because the amenities have been provided, those facilities that they lacked before have been provided to make them stay, work and play, will definitely increase the value of the area. So at the end of the day, I think that one will
see if the network comes back, because that was a very, very fascinating introduction.
Enabling
there we go. Mr. Wike, do you think you can turn off your camera?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I hear what you say, and it's a very astute observation. When we start from phase development of infrastructure and then build the demand for those areas. And you also make a great point about the fact that not everybody resides. Some people also come to certain informal areas or slums to do business, which means that there are varying needs, and that needs assessment is imperative. Ms. Oshinowo, when we talk about livelihoods and equity, which is, it flagged in my head as Mr. Wike was talking about giving us his introduction. What's the role of architectural design then in ensuring that people with lower incomes can fit into these redeveloped neighborhoods? Because we now don't want to make these spaces out of their reach. So how does architectural design play a part in this?
It plays a massive role. I'm currently involved in a project in Ngaranam in Borno State where we are providing over 300 homes for people who have been internally displaced due to the insurgency of Boko Haram. And from the work that's been done, what has come across to me as quite important is, I'm going to give 4 points. The first one, it's so important to consider both the cultural and spatial requirements of the community. For this particular project, I visited the community 3 times before the design was done to understand exactly how they live, their culture, how Islam plays a very significant role in the makeup of the home, the location of the Zahuri, which is the reception area, before you get into the confines of the home, how people are not allowed to go further in. So as an architect, it's important to understand that that's a requirement of the culture and to design the space accordingly. What you do have are situations where if the architecture isn't informed by the way people live, people don't tend to stay in those kind of locations. I think another important point to note is that the design should be adaptable. People do have changing needs. Family sizes increase, reduce, aged parents. The design has to be flexible enough that as these needs change, that it can be considered. Another very important point that we seem to forget a lot now is the importance of the climatic condition of the area. Are we designing appropriately? Are we thinking about cross ventilation? Are we thinking about the materials? How much heat is being retained? Are these spaces comfortable? Do we have shading also provided in the design? And then also, I think a very important point is identity and having people feel associated with the homes that are being created. A very important point that I noted when speaking with the community, we spoke about everything down to the color of the buildings. And what became very clear was it was important to them that these buildings resembled the kind of house color that they had before, which was based on the vernacular. It's almost like an Abuja brown color. And in the process of doing this design, we've decided to bring this back in to ensure that the idea of identity is restored for them.
Thank you so much for that. It's very interesting how when you have these conversations at first, you're thinking, okay, economic implications, you're thinking social implications, social needs. But things like making spaces adaptable, like understanding identity, understanding the requirements of the space that you live in, also will determine the level of investment that people have in the work that you're doing. That's really insightful. And it leads me to you, Dr. Yalowo, which my question then is, how do we reconcile the needs and the rights of people living in informal settlements with this agenda of modernizing cities? So we've started out talking about the needs assessment, and we've pulled in the need for identity, for adaptability, for regeneration that is familiar. How can we reconcile these needs and these rights with rebuilding and developing modern cities?
Thank you very much, Harriet. Can you hear me well? Good?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Thanks again. And I could answer your question by just saying one word, and that is co-production. So co-production is about ensuring that the urban regeneration project, no matter its scale, what its scale is co-produced by the people it's meant to serve, the end users, as well as the partners in that project. So we hear PPPs, we hear public-private partnerships, and when we bring it down to scale for in urban areas, in regeneration projects, we forget the other P, and that is the people, or C, if you want, the community. So for too long, the community have been subsumed under the P of the public. So if we want to reconcile their rights, if we want to know their rights, we need to recognize them as a partner in the project. So we see them as equal partners, not people that are to be called on when a decision has been made on what kind of regeneration project is going to happen. They must be at the drawing board when the decision is being made on the type of regeneration project that suits that area. And one of the ways we do this is by asset mapping. So instead of just a needs analysis that tells you what the needs of the community are, we map the assets that people in these communities represent, their skills, their trades, their aspirations, the current agencies that they have for improving themselves and their communities. We factor this into the regeneration plan so that from the onset, what can work is recognized. We don't wait until there are problems before these issues are then try to do a fire brigade approach to address issues of gentrification and all that. So from the beginning, we need to know what they are bringing into the table as well, and what will work in that area. So it's co-production. Yeah.
Let me ask a very quick follow-up question. How would you say this asset mapping and co-production plays a role? Has she dropped off? Oh dear. Okay. Oh no, you're here. How would you say asset mapping and co-production play a role then in assessing the commercial viability of these products, of these projects?
Okay, so it does, because then we are also able to see the people as end users. So think about it. If you are developing a new product as a commercial enterprise, you want to know who the customers are from the onset. You want to do a market analysis of what they can afford. You want to know the market segments for that new commercial product. The same way, we could apply to PPP funded regeneration projects, where we look at exactly what the people can afford and what the market is like, what they can afford in the short, medium, and long term, and what they can also bring into the project. So in this way, we can develop a product that will work for them in their community, that will be used and that will be sustainable.
You present a very interesting reframing of the conversation. And when you talk about making the people, thinking of the community as the end user, and thinking about the way that it has to be planned out, my immediate thought is this is a medium-term project. So we can't think about these things in terms of 1 minute or 2 minutes. And that makes me now think of many times what the political implications of this are. So I'm going to come to you, Mr. Busa, because governments are elected for a certain number of years, but the planning stages of these projects will often take much longer. How can we create these incentives? How can we design policies and institutions for elected officials that will manage this process, but which are still very sustainable and are not dependent on the tenure of the elected official in power?
Thank you very much, Aret, and hello, everybody, once again. I think it shouldn't be a problem. Governments are elected for 4 years in Nigeria, and that is more than enough time to conceptualize and to lock in a project. Now, what the problem we often have is that after that 4 years, because the rule of law is not being upheld to the standard it ought, and that's our fault as a society in terms of our own values, things that have been supposedly locked in get cast aside. That shouldn't happen, because 4 years is more than enough time to originate, to design, to do your stakeholder engagement, to even break ground and to start a project. And once it is locked in contractually, it should continue to its logical conclusion, you know, and the fact that it can be derailed along the way speaks more to our lack of adherence, our lack of respect for the rule of law, more than anything else. A project could take 5, 6, 8 years to complete, but it is usually locked in the first 1, 2 years. It's locked. It should be locked in. Rights, lands, stakeholder identification, business case has been made, and so on and so forth. And you know, just as I was preparing for the meeting today, I couldn't help just going back into the archive a little bit and thinking about a potential urban regeneration project. We've been talking a lot about urban renewal, which speaks to slums, but urban regeneration, as the Honorable Minister pointed out, is a little bit wider. Look at the case of the old Federal Secretariat in Ikoyi. Good enough, the Minister mentioned Ikoyi. This is a project with massive potential. We know that at some point, what is on public record is that Dr. Wale Babalakin's company, I think RIL, took over this, you know, development from the federal government, but then apparently many years have been lost because there has been this breakdown in, do I say breakdown in communication or agreement between Wale Babalakin, his company, Lagos State government. What you have there are the bare bones of a regeneration project, a beautiful, well-designed, well-built federal secretariat. I don't think anybody has ever questioned the integrity of the structures that are there. Now, somebody has come along who has a track record of attracting finance, of bringing in capital to make projects happen. But one way or the other, the person is not being allowed to perform. The person is not being allowed to carry out what should be a fairly straightforward process of upgrading, repairing, refurbishing, and letting out. And even if it were, quote unquote, luxury flats, I think about 480 or something that we planned, fine. Luxury flats, it's not for everybody. It may not be for the masses. But if there are 480 luxury flats in the heart of Ikoyi, you can imagine how many jobs that will create, not only during the construction stage, but even on an ongoing basis. You have options where you can have the ground floor used for more commercial and shops. And before you know it, a couple of thousand jobs and livelihoods come out of that project on an ongoing basis. And even if the less people from lower economic spheres do not live there, they can live somewhere else and work there. Now, the project may indeed take, even a refurbishment, may take more than 4 years. But if we were more respectful of the rule of law, we could lock in the process. You can lock in the process. That's the point. But when you lock in the process and the next person comes and throws away the key or comes and breaks the lock, as we say in Nigeria, what's the point locking in? You know, and once you've done that, once people realize that it's not safe, that even legal agreements are not adhered to, then investor confidence is lost, and your PPP is not going to happen. Thank you.
Harriet,
very interesting point. First about locking in and starting the process, and also preserving investor confidence. And it makes me think that projects like this will often require a number of stakeholders, a number of different perspectives, which brings me to you, Mr. Yaya. The UNDP supports countries in pursuing 3 directions of systemic change. And one of these is structural transformations, where you effect change in systems and structures that shape a country's sustainable development. How would you say the UNDP is progressing in the area of housing, and more specifically in urban regeneration?
Thank you very much, and thank you for Lafarge and Khalid for having me. I think the first part of that answer is to look at the entire concept of urbanization and see the challenge in its totality. Just to give you figures, by 2050, 70% of the world population will be in urban environment. And if you look at Nigeria, at the same time, the projection is about 189 million people will be in urban areas. And most of them will be in places like Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano. So the question from a UNDP perspective, and anybody who is interested in sustainable development, is to say actually the sustainable development fight, or the SDGs, will be won or lost in cities, in urban areas. So if we don't get them right, forget about SDGs, because that's where most people will be residing. So from a structural perspective, I think is one way looking at this is to say, look, how can we use the opportunity that we have to leapfrog in terms of settlement and design, and how we live in cities overall. And I think the challenge we have is, in many ways, we try to fix a problem in its locality, which is important, without looking at the entire city or looking at the future of the city. We at UNDP have recently launched a program with the governor of Lagos on smart city approach, essentially putting technology and data at the center of cities' growth. As we grow in cities, we need to look at issues for example, on flooding, and issues on, it's not only about the construction part, it's also about the environment is changing. We're entering more and more extreme climate. Climate change is a reality. Lagos loses about $44 billion every year from flooding alone. So how do we put design, climate change, but also from a perspective of sustainability? And I think that is what we try to push and engage with governments. Our panelist, Tosin, has just given an example in the Northeast. We work very closely with her and the government, especially Governor Zulum. And the idea there was to really say, rather than seeing what we call slums or areas where most poor people live, or another way of saying is where majority people live, is to put design at the center of it, is to say that we will not have low expectation for them. We should not be looking at these areas as, oh, let's give them whatever we can give them, they'll be happy with it. But to say, how can we leapfrog, use technology, everything we've learned in urban life to build this low housing in a way that is conducive. And I think that's what we try to do at UNDP, and we will continue to support most of the cities in this country.
That makes a lot of sense. When you talk about design-centered, data-centered leapfrogging, it does strike a note, because I think one of the things that has already come up as a theme in this conversation is shifting the perspectives with which we approach this conversation. And you're introducing again another perspective that we must put in mind. And so, Mr. Yusuf, I'm going to come to you now and talk about, I mentioned at the beginning, Sustainable Development Goals. How does urban regeneration help us to meet these goals?
Thank you, Harry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so urban regeneration has become critical because due to the speed with which we wanted to make people as comfortable as possible we forgot some of our structures and some of the technology that was available to help us to rebuild or expand or repair the aging structures were not implemented. So it's now become important that we look at that. Now, sustainability is a 360-degree scenario where you are looking at not just the health of the individuals, you are looking at the reuse of materials, you are looking at the preservation of culture, you're also looking at also giving people hope for the future. So you impact the environment, you impact the quality of life, and you impact the ability for people to achieve their potentials. And the reason why people move from the rural areas to the urban areas because they don't just feel they cannot achieve what their natural talents are. So urban regeneration is a focal point to achieve those goals. Because when you look at urban regeneration, if you take a cognizance of what all the panelists have said, there has been a mention of how do you make sure that what you are going to redesign preserves the culture and architecture. There has been a mention of how you make sure that you capture the data that effectively looks at the projection of the population you're going to have. There has been a mention of how you take cognizance of what kind of design do they want, up to the point of the color of the paint of the house, which we even think is so little to be considered. So I think when you put all those into a basket and you implement them, obviously we should be able to meet those goals.
Thank you so much. You've spoken very eloquently on one of the primary things that drive rural to urban movement. And it's important to keep in mind, especially with city planning. I want to talk a little bit more about the money, because yes, these are all incredible things that we're saying. And I know that the foundational question is always, how are we going to fund it? So, Mr. Wike, from a valuation point of view, what do local and international investors want to see before committing the huge sums of money that would be required to achieve some of these things that we're talking about?
Just the question is for me?
Yes, sir, it's for you.
Thank you, because I went offline. Thank you very much. I think that's what investors, both local and international, want to see, excuse me, is the security of their investment. No investor wants to go to an area to invest when he's not sure of the security of his investment. And this goes into two ways. One is the government policies and programs that will attract people to come into those areas to invest. And the second one is the marketability of the investment. Now, for an investor to come and invest in real estate or in any kind of investment, you need to carry out feasibility and viability study of the investment he wants to carry out. Now that we're talking about urban regeneration, for people to actually invest means that, first of all, there must be a government policy that, look, this is the way we want to go. And the private sector are willing to invest their resources in such area. So first of all is security. We talk about marketability of that particular investment. And finally, is the willingness of the people to also accept what is coming in, because that is also part of the marketability anyway, because if you put in your money in a place where people are looking for 3-bedroom flats and you are building 6-bedroom flat, there's every tendency that nobody would want to take that particular property. So we need to get to the level where there should be an incentive on those who are ready to also invest their fund to be able to recoup back their money, because they are also looking for profit. That does not mean that the government cannot assist in this way. The government can assist through their policies and programs to ensure that those who are coming to invest have security of their investments and the marketability of that investment.
I noticed that, again, you highlighted the need for needs assessment, the importance of a needs assessment, understanding what the people in that area need, and also the need for security of investments. It's very important. You had mentioned something I think in your first answer that I want to pull from and address to you, Dr. Yalowo. Now, we have two types of slums in Nigerian centers, urban centers. Some are degenerated areas close to historic city centers. And then there are newer unplanned neighborhoods that are at the outskirts of cities. When we're talking about funding, we might often then have to find ourselves choosing one or the other. For successful models of urban regeneration, where would you say governments, financiers, investors, where should we start from? These unplanned settlements on the outskirts, because they will continue to expand, or the degenerated neighborhoods in the historic centers, which will continue to degenerate if they're not attended to? It's a bit of a conundrum, but I have faith in you.
Thank you, Harriet. And it's a difficult question to answer, mainly because the character of slum settlements are not, we can't put them into this basket of typology. There are also various other types of slum communities. We have the waterfront slums. We have the public housing slums that are developed, high-rise, 4 floors and all that, government estates that have been left abandoned, and they are now in serious state of disrepair. But the fundamental question is, so how do you choose between slums that are originated as slums or those that were developed to be nice housing for low to middle income earners, and over time have degenerated into something that, places where people don't even want to live? So there are no straight answers to that. It depends on what the project is about and wants to achieve. It also depends very much on the willingness of the people and the acceptability of the idea of regeneration by the people. Like Mr. Simon has said, the truth is that even the local people are quite scared of private sector investment in their areas because of the pervasive occurrence of gentrification. They suspect that when these nice projects are completed, they would not be part of it because they would have been outpriced. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, they do not trust their governments because over the past, that social contract of trust has been undermined by a lot of occurrences, forceful evictions, and so on and so forth. So how do you begin to make them accept this project, as nice as they have and as impactful as they could be? So I would say that where to start from is in recognition of the diversity of and the specialness, so to say, of each individual slum community, and to tailor projects to the needs and the assets that are inherent in such communities. So in that way, we can ensure that trust is built in, the private sector becomes more of a social entrepreneur than a profit-seeking entity who are able to recognize the social aspect of that project over the profit, and are able to factor in, acceptance of that project over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a difficult question, and I think one of the things I hear you saying is, first, understand that it is a difficult and more diverse conversation than choosing one or the other. We have a lot of questions in our Q&A box, so I'm going to take a minute to ask the Honorable Minister. First, sir, I would like to hear from the government perspective how the government can identify, areas where you can say, okay, this is the area we want to focus on. Let's pull in a multitude of stakeholders to focus on that. But then somebody says, why is it difficult for government to update governing policies based on contemporary needs, cloaked with empathy? And it goes on to say, we often talk of tax. Is it difficult to realize that poor Nigerians seem to pay more indirect taxes? So I think that the question here might be, is there a way for the government, for the citizens to feel more seen when policies are being updated? And I know it's a difficult question, but I also think that you are perfectly suited to answer it, sir.
Harriet, I think you're being unkind today.
No, sir, no.
Now, on a serious note, you see, government, we all need to lash out at somebody at something when our expectations are not met. And government has been the thing to reach out for. And to the extent that some of us on this side can still take the punches without losing our dentition, it's all well and good if it makes the people feel good. But we welcome as many of you on that side too, to this side someday to get a taste of it. And because, as I say, those of us who are here are not here because we're the smartest. We just got called. And that is why I enjoy these interactions and conversations. Now, there's so much that government can do, and there's a sense in which also we help to define what kind of government we want. Do we want a nanny state? In which case, certain rights also have to be given up if we want a nanny state. So we might lose proprietary rights because nanny will take everything to provide for everybody in equal measure. But we have chosen to have a competitive capital experiment, and therefore property rights are protected. Yes, government can do a lot of things, and one of the things that I would like to put in the mix is that however the funding is contrived, the Executive Order 7 by the federal government allowing private sector players to mobilize taxes in terms of tax credits is one way to deal with financing this. I like to put that on the table. We're already using it for roads, but it's not limited to roads. It is usually applicable to public infrastructure that members of the public have access to. And in terms of the scale of investment that is necessary perhaps to do this kind of work, is not anywhere in the order of the scale of investments that we need to build our roads, especially federal roads. So this is something, and the order also allows individuals and corporations to pool resources together. That was a major reform by the president in allowing not just one person to act alone, but also to do crowdfunding to target something. So I just want to put that in the public domain. I take the point that Dr. Tosin Oshino made about architecture and planning, and it's a very, very important point. I just would like some clarification from her, whether the project for the IDPs, because the one I saw were not in urban areas, they were in rural areas. And I think that we also, whilst the point about ownership, color, identity are all valid, I just wanted some clarification about whether that was an urban project or a rural one or semi-urban one. The one I saw was in Maiduguri was not an urban one that we were involved in. And Dr. Oyalowo's point about the C or the additional P is well noted as well, and we ought to keep this in mind. But I want us to also see that, again, there are different shades of this problem. There are places where you can actually start a wholesome building and infrastructure. There are places where the buildings exist and they're not going to go away. And when you just look at the size of the intervention, you don't even want to go near it. It's a hot potato, politically, socially. And so what you can do is something like what the Lagos state government did way back. It was called the LMDGP, the Lagos Metropolitan Developments and Governance Program. And I think it was done in collaboration with one of the UN agencies to intervene, build roads around existing houses, provide water, provide schools in communities that didn't have them, embed a hospital or a health center in them because you couldn't move the houses. And again, we need to see all of those in their fullest possibilities as against taking down the place and starting from the beginning. And again, I go back to the point that Surveyor Wike made about valuation, and this is the key. Every time you inject infrastructure, as you improve the quality of life on the one hand, you are increasing the asset value on the other hand. Surveyor Wike will tell you that if you invest in infrastructure, property appreciates by between 20 to 40%. So rent will move up. So the road that used to be waterlogged, that is not waterlogged anymore, the landlord is going to say, oh boy, you have to increase your rent now. And so where do we draw that balance such that the person we sought to protect in the first place doesn't lose his accommodation because the value has gone up? And I think that is a very thin line between regeneration and gentrification. My last point, and this is a very, very important point, and it relates to the point that was made about the Federal Secretariat. And it was made around many unclear facts, unverified allegations. It was also made on the foundation of law and order. So let me put two models before all of us, two models that we all experience. 1004 quarters. There was a regeneration there. It happened in the same Lagos state. They got approval. They were both sold by the same federal government. Two properties were in Lagos. Why did one get done and the other didn't get done? It wasn't personal. It was always clear that 1004 was a residential environment, and it was approved on that basis. When you want to change at best, mobile community, workers who come in the morning and go at 4 p.m., and you want to put fully embedded families there are more governance issues involved. It's a total change of environment, a total change of density in the country's perhaps most priced real estate. So we were talking about 480 families. What about their support staff? And if you inject 480 permanent families there, which schools do their children go? Is it St. Saviour's or the government secondary schools that were full? Which security? Is it the one at Club Road? The small police post? Which health center? These were the planning issues that in my time as governor, the Federal Secretariat complex was confronted with and documented. If you respond to these questions, we will give you a planning permit. How do the support staff for those families, drivers, nannies, how do they get there? What bus systems? So, and if they are going to be coming by Okada and motorcycles, what do we tell the other residents of Ikoyi that we're going to allow motorcycles in their prime real estate? Those were the questions. And if you look at the planning law in the UK, there's a Section 14 application. A similar provision exists in the Lagos state law. And we said to the developers in the Babalaki Federal Secretariat thing, these are the conditions on which we will grant you approval. They're documented. And perhaps in planning this kind of development, one of the lessons we should learn is that planning is a longer term project. Before you cough out money, first of all, it is advice, and that is what will happen in other jurisdictions that we want to be like. We will get commitments from all the regulatory agencies first. We want to do this. What will your disposition be? The American embassy wanted to buy a property in Lagos when I was governor, and they came to ask, will I give approval for certain things? And I said yes, and they wanted it in writing. But we will pay the money first and think that we will blow it away through the approvals. Planning doesn't work like that. And I think it's important for this audience to know, so that, as I said, I learned from the audience and I want to share what I know. These are matters of fact. So thank you very much.
Honorable Minister, I think that you have now in turn been unfair to me, because you have given me about 5 questions now, and I'm trying to decide where we go with the limited time. So you've paid me back in my own coin. Thank you.
Well, I don't pay an unkind act with an unkind act. I rewarded you with more information.
Thank you very much. But you make a point that I took note of, which is that there's always that fear or that consideration that when you regenerate, you can now make those places out of reach of the populations for which they're intended. And one of the things that has brought to mind, and I'll ask this to you, Ms. Oshinowo, is lower cost building materials, lower cost architectural designs. Do you think that these can, or how do you think that these may play a role in regenerating urban areas, but still keeping the spaces accessible for the people that we are designing the regeneration for?
Thank you very much. I think the first and foremost thing is the concept of sharing of facilities. It's so important when you live in an urban or even in a rural area, the consideration of sharing. I'll give an example. A lot of the apartment buildings that are being built now, everybody has an ensuite. It's not ideal. You know, previous times in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when housing was designed, there was shared WC units within a home. You know, you have to think long term about the sustainability, the amount of water consumption which is being used, which these days we don't tend to consider. These are things that do affect, you know, cost long term maintenance. I think another big point to note is the possibility of starting to look at experimenting with materials. We have a very standard way of building in Nigeria. Why are we not exploring new technologies for building? I know that the Honorable Minister did mention the fact that the project that I presented actually is in a rural area. It's not urban, but I do believe that there are certain principles that can be taken across. For example, in that situation, we have considerable concerns about cost. We're doing an experimental process of a tyrolean finish on the wall, which is a mix of the existing ground condition and cement. It's going to give us a certain pigment that will be on the wall finish. We are looking at a more durable finish for the walls, but also it's bringing the cost down. So, you know, we have to start to think experimental. We need to think about realistically, how many people can really afford to have air conditioning and pay the bills? You know, why are we not going back to the old system of cross ventilation and breeze, passive systems that help people to live comfortably in their homes? So I do think there needs to be a complete rethink about what we consider to be appropriate and being more realistic with what we have available to us. But I think ultimately, if places are comfortable and places look beautiful, people will feel associated with them, whether they're high income or low income.
I hear this. Now I have about 6 minutes and 3 more questions I want to ask. So I'm excited about how we're going to make this happen. But Mr. Yusuf, Ms. Femi, this conversation about rethinking products, rethinking material, experimental product use, made me think about some of the work that you do. So perhaps you can speak about what sorts of innovations we can also bring into the conversation when we're talking about building accommodations that accommodate lower income earners. What are some innovations we should be thinking about? What are some low cost products that we should be thinking about?
Thank you, Ari, for your question. It's interesting that this is becoming more and more an important question. I've had to answer this in 2 public forums in the past week, you'll be surprised to know. We already have some of the solutions out there, but what we're now looking for is an opportunity to apply. So, for example, we see that there's a lot of waste, which is strongly linked to sustainability on construction sites. So what we're seeing in Lafarge Africa is, since we have a mortar division, once you finish your block work, every other thing you need, you bring to site, mix with water, and you apply. So we have our wall screed for plastering, we have our floor screed, and we have our tile adhesives. This will also reduce the health and safety impact of the skilled tradesmen on site. They do a lot of very hard laborious work. Imagine they do the block work, they'll come back, mix manually on site, and do the plastering, and it's a lot of hard work. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is technology. Technology has to come in. The industry is long overdue. So we're seriously looking at 3D printing, which will help us to scale two, three bedroom houses for now. I'm excited that architect Tosin Oshinoa mentioned Tyrolean. We are at advanced stages of completing our own Tyrolean product. And what this will do, it will do two things. One, you're finishing, so you have a natural finish that looks more like nature finish. The other is that we can embed color into it. So once you apply it, you are good to go. So I think within Lafarge Africa, we already have a couple of solutions and products that can go into live projects. And I think we should be looking at doing this.
You speak, and I think about what Mr. Yaya said about leapfrogging. And that's what you're saying. Take where we are, see how we can pull technology and innovation and leapfrog. So I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Yaya, because it did speak to where you started from, which is like, look, we have to expand how we're thinking about this, pull in data, pull in technology, and see how many steps we can jump ahead. So how would you say that government policy, with the support of the UNDP, how would they both stimulate investment in research in development of local building materials?
Thanks for that. We obviously for UNDP, we're not that specific in terms of research for example, local building materials. But what we do normally is to do research for what we call impact investment. The idea is that how can you do investments that have social good? And to do that, you need to be able to have a data and research to support that. So UNDP is part of a global coalition on impact investment, which develops really a local market intelligence of where that kind of impact investment lies. Essentially, what we say is that we're reaching at a critical point. It's not only in Nigeria, but globally, on how we do development, how we do investment, how we look after the vulnerable groups, and how do we give people opportunities. And in the urban context, housing becomes obviously the number one critical component to deal with this issue. So on our research impact investment, we also have something called SDG impact, where we look at which kind of impact that will lead to accelerating the sustainable development. So we have all those research, and we work very closely with the Ministry of Finance, and the Minister of Finance herself chairs this, and this will be available and digitally available by early next year.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Gusa, before we then go into questions. We have a lot of questions, and I'm excited to hear some of them. Now, you've been involved in designing a few well-structured urban regeneration projects for state governments. And we've talked a lot here about things that we can do, and they're exciting. I'm also curious, how do we make that leap from plans to reality? How do we move from planning to action?
Thank you very much. The thing is that I think we've focused on Lagos a little bit, or Lagos has come up because Lagos is our most vibrant urban center in Nigeria, an economic center. You have to start at the end, I think. To some extent, there's an analysis method called backcasting. So what do you want Lagos to look like in 40 years? Okay, that is the Lagos, as we say in Nigeria, of our dreams. You then start to work your way back. What do I then need to do now? What do I do in 10 years, 15, 20, and in 40 years, the idea being we are where we want to be. And I think one important idea we need in Lagos is just the concept that the future is vertical. Okay, and that's why I was excited between the Lafarge concrete ideas concept, and urban regeneration. It has to be vertical. In other words, a lot of slums that Dr. Basirat talks about, a slum by and large is a single story. In other words, it's just on the ground floor, regardless of the quality of the building, ground floor, at most, there may be 2 floors, okay? And I think for a starter, the future of Lagos, we need to see how we can move the footprint of Lagos from 1 to 2 stories, minimum up to 3 to 4 stories. It will do a couple of things. First of all, it may shrink the footprint of buildings, okay? Because you are stacking up 3, 4 stories instead of just 1 and 2 story, okay? Secondly, even if it occupies the same footprint that the built area currently occupies, you would have doubled capacity, okay? We also know that as the generations go on, family sizes get smaller, so you're going to need more units anyway. So I think and by the way, the reason we talk about 3 and maximum 4 stories is that is the limit before which you need things like lifts. So we don't depend on lifts and mechanical systems. So how do we get the baseline of Lagos, the base of Lagos to 4 stories? Okay, how do we make that the norm? Anything above that becomes an additional engineering and investment challenge. But the basic, how do we get Lagos to 4 stories? If you go to Lagos Island, this is the most established part in terms of community, in terms of culture, and you can see there's a reason why a lot of Isaleko and all those areas, even the family-built businesses and structures, they're all 4 stories. There's a reason they got there. They took it to the maximum they could take it within their limited means, and within the limits of technology. Yes, we have technology to go higher, to put in lifts and all of that, but that takes on a whole other that's a whole other challenge in terms of investment and technology. But how do we get as much of Lagos, the Lagos footprint, to look, as it were, like Lagos Island, in the sense that taking it to 4 stories? And I think if we have that as the foundation, as the platform, then anything above that, is as investment permits. And again, this is why, concrete ideas, I love the name, but in this particular instance, in terms of verticality, the verticality of Lagos, concrete is at the center of it.
I hear this. We have so many questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing what some of your perspectives would be. Mr. Wike, we have a question for you. How will professionals in the built environment apply empathy? This is coming up again. Proactivity, creativity tailored to cultural contemporary needs as they plan their business approaches.
Thank you. You've already answered the question. That is why they are called professionals in that field. We have identified 7 professionals in the built environment. And the idea here is that as a professional, you have your professional ethics, you have your professional practice, and you also have your experience and your competencies. So we bring these competencies to bear, where what an estate surveyor and valuer will do might not be what the engineer will do. What the engineer will do will not be what the land surveyor will do. So to bring out that creativity, it means that you have to bring the professionals together. Now, for urban regeneration, I think that what we can do is to bring these professionals together and see it, like somebody have said here, we need to plan. And it's from the planning that we move. Before we go into the construction, before we begin to talk about the infrastructures and all that, that will now begin to bring out the city as a livable, workable, and playable city. Now, once the professionals are involved from the planning stage, some of all these things will be reduced. So I think that what we need to do is to collaboration, both the professional bodies, the investors in the private sector, and the government. With this tripartite arrangement, where everybody will now know.
Network's going again. Let's see. Let's give him a minute. Okay. Mr. Wike, I will just move on very quickly. We have a question for you, Mr. Yaya. The question is, how can we talk about housing without politicizing the conversation? How can we ensure that we focus on housing as a basic human need?
So if the question is, how can we make sure that housing is a basic human need? Well, that I think. Sorry,
yes, how can we avoid politicizing the conversation and keep it in the space of a basic human need? Because I think that influences how we interact then.
That is impossible in a 200 million people country that is very energetic and very opinionated. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but I think what matters is a logical process on where housing is provided, how it's provided, and where is data-led or needs-led, essentially, data-led, needs-led. So if housing is done in that kind of way, then I think it makes, you will not remove the politics out of it, but you will at least convince most of the people who are fair and decent, who will see it for what it is. But essentially, in a democracy, it's impossible to remove that any type of action that government takes will be seen as a political action.
That's very true. And we have what will be a two-part question. There's a part for you, Honorable Minister, and then I think the second part, we'll open it to the floor. First question is, the first part of it says, urban regeneration is tough because so many, what you're saying, Sayaya, so many interests have to be reconciled. How can federal, state, and local governments collaborate to manage these interests in order to create bankable projects? And then, can we have examples of urban centers where urban regeneration projects could create investments and create jobs and opportunities for the poor? So it's a two-part question. How can governments, federal, state, and local collaborate to manage the interests and create bankable projects? And then, do we have any examples of how these projects have created or could create investments, jobs, and opportunities?
Okay. First of all, the collaboration that is required is a very extensive one. And it requires all of us to deal with sincerity and honesty. And let me tell you my experience, and maybe that would attempt to answer the question. When we started the Blue Line from Eric Moore to Jora Mile 2, the rail project, we were also implementing the LNDGP program that I spoke about in the Jora Badia. There was already a school. There was already a road being built by some of the best construction companies. The roads were narrow, but we said, nevertheless, even they were not for two cars, make them walkable, friendly pavements, separated pedestrians from motorists. And we just thought, hold on a second, this is barely 2 kilometers to the National Theatre station. There's land, it was a refuse dump. Let's clean it out and build a housing unit for low-income people there. And this was the beginning of our troubles. There was ownership on the refuse dump. There were people who were renting cardboard, who were landlords. And this speaks to the economy of slums. And also the vested interest you have to take care. And of course, the amnesties of this world came immediately. That Governor Fashola wanted to displace X million people on a refuse dump. And I was dragged before the UK Parliament for trying to do what I thought was right. Build a low-income residence close to a train station so that these people could also benefit. And at the end of the day, it was all a hoax. There was really no amnesty. Because when we finally did resettlement and everything and we paid them, it was the so-called amnesties who came to collect this money from them. That's in the past. But there are successful projects. And Isaleko that Gusa mentioned is my village. So we did something like that there. An 11-story development that attracted not only investment, but also government finance. But we had to relocate all of the people to an existing housing estate owned by Lagos State government, just to demonstrate commitment that we will first provide shelter and you will come back. So what we did was we got families to parcel small pieces of real estate together to create the base to go up, just as Musa was recommending. We went to 11 floors. We created their entertainment center on one floor there, parking on, I think, about 1 or 2 floors. So, but some and substance of the story is that if you had 300 square meters of real estate at the beginning, just land, you will get 300 square meters of built-up apartment. That may be 1.5 apartments. And we gave people the option to pay the balance and so on. That was how we framed the contract. And then we had invited people to come and buy up the remainder of the real estate. Of course, the whole construction period was a lot of work for artisans, engineering companies, and we provided lifts there. And it's a story that can be replicated. Ogba Housing Estate today, where there are scores of flats there, was also a regeneration project that we did. Again, we used that satellite housing estate to move old pensioners out of the place, raise up the real estate to 4 floors, and build more blocks. And when they came back, they were the first to get their own apartments back without any consideration, because that was our agreement. Of course, the rest we sold to members of the public. So these are models based on what has been done before that can certainly be improved upon or replicated.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Yellow, I'm going to come with you to this question. Someone is asking, how can infrastructure PPPs be designed in a way that the poor can derive a net benefit from them? So not just that it's suitable, but that they actually derive a net benefit. How can we think about this?
We can think about this, and this is also related to the issue of gentrification that the Honorable Minister raised. And I think we can think about it in terms of having a social contract that accompanies this project, and which is why I emphasizing the need for co-production of PPP projects. So when you have co-production, you can identify the needs and the agency of the low-income people, and this can be factored into the project. So people or entities that are going to benefit from the project would do that not at the cost of the poor, but by adding value to the lower income. And then this contract will also ensure that the benefits are spread around, so that if a property owner has his property at higher value after regeneration, he is mandated to keep the rents at affordable rates over a period of time, for instance, so that people that are residents before regeneration can still remain in that locality after. But it also all depends on the kind of project that we're talking about and the scale of the slum area, if it is that. And let me quickly add that there are a lot of things that are working that we do not recognize because our expectations as citizens are high. Let me quickly mention, not because the Honorable Minister is here, but because as someone that lives in Lagos, I see the impact of the beautification in Lagos. Look at Ikorodu Road. It's a nice place to pass through if there are no traffic. So regeneration is not just about housing, it's also about ensuring that the urban area is livable, is nice to pass through. You are not, life chances of people are increased merely by living in that area. If Oshodi can have a park, there was a time Oshodi had it wasn't an amusement, it was a park, a recreational park, as busy and as congested as Oshodi is, for people to come in and relax in that space over the weekend. People of all income classes to me, that is a success story that we really need to recognize and replicate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yusuf, we have a question that I think you will be able to answer. Where is the place of COP26 in the urban regeneration with concrete? Is Lafarge going green in the production of cement, or it's just going to be business as usual?
Thanks, Arit. This is a very hot topic globally, not just Nigeria. It's linked to the innovation space we have to move into. So for Lafarge globally, we are looking at various products that we can classify green, and there is a standard. So what we've done is not to look at a standard that will be developed by Lafarge or Holcim alone. This is a standard that was developed globally with various scientific bodies and also institutions that monitor emission to the environment. So we now have a calculation that can assess whether your concrete is green or not. And I'll be pleased to let you know that Lafarge Africa actually has a product from our informal zinc plant that qualifies as a green product. But there is a process to move into actually bagging it and then using all the labels that will make you be able to sell it into the public space. So we have to go through that process. But beyond that, we'll have to extend this to concrete and extend it to new products. So the answer is we are already in the process of churning out more and more of our products that will be green. And this has a multiple impact to the green classification or the sustainable classification of buildings. So yes, we are on track. We're on track and we're making the right progress. So very soon, I hope the Nigerian populace will begin to see Lafarge Africa products that are classified green.
Mr. Wike, let me ask you this question. We have a question that says, how do we ensure that we reduce or eliminate the possibility of further slums? Many towns are expanding at the moment, and those areas are not planned at all. So it also speaks to unplanned neighborhoods being built on the outskirts of cities. Is there, in your opinion, a way that we can build urban centers that don't have slums or informal settlements? Or at least what are some things that we can think of as cities continue to expand?
I think that what we need to do is to do the planning. Once you have an area you want to develop, you do the planning. And it might not be possible for you to say you want to eradicate totally slums, because there are people that would definitely want to stay at a place that they can afford. And it's this affordability that actually begin to develop into slum area. So what I think we should do is that we should provide facilities and amenities in those areas that people are willing to keep and to maintain. Because you might provide all these facilities, if there are no proper maintenance, they would definitely going to go down. And that is where that is the beginning of slum. Because once those facilities are going down and there's no proper maintenance, there's no proper care of those facilities that have been provided either by the communities, that is those that are staying within the neighborhood, or by the government. Once there is no proper maintenance, there is every tendency that the facilities will go down. And once that is done, slum will set in. So for me, first thing is for us to plan, have a short-time plan, medium-time plan, and a long-time plan. Look, we are talking about Lagos. Me, I want to talk about Rivers State because that's where I practice. Here in Rivers State, we want to have a medium term between now and 10 years' time. Where do I want Rivers State to be?
Mr. Wike, if you can hear me,
which area? Just like what the government, what the present government is doing. When they created Greater Port Harcourt, when they came in, they said, no, we don't want just to have a Greater Port Harcourt. We want to have greater towns. So they are now trying to develop the towns that made up the former River State. So we now have about 6-7 towns that the government wants to develop. Now that they want to develop these towns, how long are we going to, what are the infrastructure are we going to provide in the first 4 years? And somebody have talked here before that it's good for you to plan. And we have, politically, we have 4 years for one tenure. But if we have a good government system, Lagos State is working. When, Mr. Minister, when Mr. Minister left, his successor did not abandon the project that he started. They continued. And I think that that is what the government should be, that when a new government comes, you don't need to discard, you don't need to stop the project that your predecessor has started, complete that project. And that is what the governor of Rivers State has done.
I think that network has gone again.
It's because Mr. Wike is bestriding 2 states.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. Ms. Oshino, let me put this to you. More focus seems to be placed on housing infrastructure, but not on environmental management infrastructure. So can you speak to how we can place both of this in the conversation as we're talking about urban regeneration?
Just quickly, when we say environmental management, is this greening of areas? Is this collecting of refuse? Is that what the question pertains to? Because if it's that, is it that?
That's all of the question, but I would say what speaks to you, what spoke to you when you heard it, and then let's go with that.
I think it even goes beyond just environmental, infrastructure. It's transportation infrastructure. It's a whole complete network. It was spoken about that we should look at Lagos and go 4 floors up. In countries in the world where they have cities where they've had heavy densification. Let's imagine somewhere like New York. You have an infrastructure. You have a transport infrastructure that sustains that. We live in a city where the bulk of our transport is via the road. If you go up and you have smaller building footprints, do we have the amount of parking space to accommodate all these people in this very small area? So it's a push and a pull. You solve one problem, you could potentially create another. But it's about having a healthy balance. Another great thing about being able to densify is you potentially also have, well, in principle, if planned properly, you have more green areas that can be planned and focused and fixed. And you in that process, you create a more serene environment for people to live in. So it really is many moving parts working together to create a long-term sustainable solution. So not just the environment, transport as well.
So we have to think about so many more factors. I hear that.
Yes.
Mr. Gusu, I'm going to bring my last question to you. What opportunities does urban regeneration create for Nigerian financial institutions? It's a very interesting question.
Look, the point is capital is always looking for somewhere to land. And if you create the right environment, it will land. We know that apart from, even FDI and the big money, if you like, even just remittances by Nigerians abroad, by companies and individuals and interests outside of Nigeria. Remittances are even higher than FDI, most years. So money is flowing into Nigeria. Money wants to flow into Nigeria. And what we need to do is create those landing pads and say, look, this is where money can land. This is safe. This has been demonstrated. The project that the Honorable Minister mentioned, is Alegongon. Every time I see that building, I'm inspired. I just think, what could have been, But, by now, it shouldn't just be that one white and brown, edifice standing, 11-story edifice standing there. It should be 10 of them. There should be 20 of them, But somehow, we lose the steam. Because we lose the innovation and the push and the desire. If that was the pilot is standing right there. That is the proof of concept. Okay, Isalegongo is the proof of concept. So it doesn't need, you don't need rocket science. It's like, no, it's been done. Look at it right there. Why don't we have 5 of them, 10 of them, 20 of them? That's our challenge. We run out of steam. We have a short policy attention span. It's a, I don't know how else to call it, but we have this short attention span. We're looking for the next new thing. It's like the old one, the one you did is pretty good. Let's multiply, let's replicate, because capital is looking for where to land. And if we had created an opportunity for capital to deliver us not just 1, but 10 Isalegongons, we would have had them by now.
I hear that. So we're rounding up now, and I would like to ask each of our panelists, I will invite you one by one to give us your rounding up thoughts. Just in a minute, give us something that we will take away from this conversation. Honorable Minister, I will ask you last so that you can assemble your thoughts. But I will start with you, Mr. Wike. In 1 minute, your final summation.
Well, first, I want to thank you for inviting us to participate in this seminar, and I want to also thank all the other panelists, all the other participants who've all learned from each other. For me, I think that what we should do is to plan our cities and allow the government policies and programs to run in such a way that private sector will be able to invest in urban regeneration, because they have the funds, and with the government policies and with the collaboration with the private sector and professionals, we'll have a better city to live, to play, and to work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Oshino?
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. I think what I take away from this is that ultimately all the solutions or the possible solutions, it should always be centered around people, and the end user. Are we creating the right experience for that person who lives in the city, low income, high income, conscious of how our cities have to evolve and have to further regenerate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yaya?
From my perspective, I think cities will obviously decide whether we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals or not, because that is where most people will live. That's where most poor people will live. It's projected to 2 billion people in urban poverty, or trapped in urban poverty globally. So getting cities right will be really our collective future. If we don't get it right, we know where this story will end.
I hear that. Dr. Yalo?
Let us co-produce public-private partnership projects as far as we want them, if we want them to work for urban regeneration. Let us not forget the people in the mix, and they should be at the table from the start, not at the end. In this way, regeneration projects can be made to be more, can be designed to be inclusive and to help achieve the SDGs, and also to ensure that the city modernization projects that we want to see are not ones that exclude the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gusa?
Look, I think I have to just back up what Dr. Oyalawo Basirat has just said. We need to take that 3P that was in the title of this program and make it 4P, which is public-private people partnerships. Let's put the people at the center of these partnerships. And in my last 15 seconds, on a lighter note, I just want to say to the Honorable Minister, you interviewed me for the job on LMDGP in those days, but somehow it didn't work. I just want the Minister to know your boy is still here, and I'm still loyal. Thank you.
Mr. Yusuf?
Yes, for me, I think there's a big takeaway. Despite all the challenges, one key thing is to hear that finance is looking for a way to land, and with the right environment, money for me, that's a big learning. Very good seminar from where we've learned a lot. I think we shouldn't worry about achieving the COP26 targets. Sustainability has become part of our life, has come to stay. The resources will never be enough for us to get to where we are going. We're hitting 220 million now. There are materials already available, technology already available. We've gone past the feasibility trial stage. We are now at implementation stage, and we should look for projects where we start implementing immediately. And we should embrace green technology. It's healthier, it's more comforting, and it gives us hope for the future. Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Well, I want to say, first of all, that this has been a very enriching experience for me, in spite of everything that Arit has done to make my job difficult. But nevertheless, it's a pleasure to see you again. But really and truly, how big is the problem? And I'd like to start from where Yusuf stopped. I don't know about 220 million. Sadly, people die every day, but aging and natural causes, do we deduct that number as we accumulate the number going forward, or we just multiply the growth rate. And hopefully a census will hold next year to put these issues to bed. But I like to thank Lafarge and all the very, very distinguished participants, and of course, the inimitable moderator who has held all of us together. And to say that I see enormous possibilities for people, for business, for our economic growth in seeing regeneration as a key driver for a change of lives and livelihoods and economic opportunities in Nigeria. And I think that I lie entirely with Guza about the point he made. The people must be at the center of it. And we thank Dr. Yalo for keeping us on the straight and narrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think that we have had a very interesting, very insightful, and very people-focused conversation. At every point in this conversation, it was think about the people, think about the environment. I know we have a poll that is coming up now, and so we're going to lead straight into that poll. Is our poll ready? It's a 30-second poll, and we're going to ask you to please answer yes, no, maybe. Very straightforward. And just so that we get an idea of where our participants, our audience is on this very interesting conversation. Unfortunately, the panelists cannot vote, but we will ask our audience and our participants to please go ahead and vote very quickly. All right. Are we good to proceed? Well, it has been, again, an utmost pleasure to moderate this conversation. I have so much new knowledge about what urban regeneration means and the scope and the possibilities. And it is now my pleasure to hand over to the CCEO. Khalid, thank you again for having me.
All right, it's a pleasure. And I want to thank you so much for the way it was managed, the timely allocation, and really extracting the maximum of each and every panelist we have, and goes beyond all our honorable minister, of course. So it's been really insightful and giving really directions throughout the discussion. If my closing statement, and sorry, I try to summarize just very quickly 3 points. My first point, it's always important that all comes together for a cause. And I believe here, apart from the PPP, that definitely we're going to move it to the 4P, including the people. But the theme of today's discussion, that people are getting together around the cause, discussing it from a 360-degree approach, and probably this is how we need to look at our key focus things. My second point is around sustainability, and I'll build on one or two of the panelists and Fahmi at the end on it. Sustainability is coming. It's like any other development. Environment, preserving the environment is coming. I think it becomes our choice, is what is the cost we need to put? Because if we mitigate it today, if we work on it today, it's much cheaper than addressing it 10 years down the road. It's coming anyway, it's inevitable, but it's our choice really to do it the reasonable cost way, or we just let go, and we will have to do it at the end of the day, but sometimes it becomes terribly expensive and on the favor of so many important things that we should have done much earlier. My third point is really now, if we look at the macros and considering Nigeria within, there is plenty of cheap money in the world. A lot of countries internationally has reached negative interest rates. People borrows with a deficit cost, if we want to put it like that. I think looking at the 4P, looking at BOTs, looking at consortiums, looking at substituting internal financing by external financing, which is currently very cheap, taking 10 years ago, could also be a very good opportunity once there is a design, once there is a decision, and once there is an alignment on one or two causes that we need to address. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you very, very much. And now it is my pleasure to hand over officially to the anchor of today's webinar, Ginika.
Thank you very much, Arit. My sincere appreciation to the Honorable Minister and all our distinguished panelists. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Khalid, for being here with us today. So we've come to the end of today's session, and would look forward to inviting you for our subsequent editions. Thank you very much.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a great day and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.